Hey there, it's Steve from Serious Keto, and in this video we're going to get funky with fermentation. One of the food techniques that I really plan on diving into over the course of this winter is various forms of fermentation, whether that's lacto-fermentation or making vinegar, potentially making kombucha. There are a lot of interesting things you can do with fermentation. It lends an incredibly complex flavor to certain dishes, depending on what you're making, like kimchi. It also has great probiotic and or prebiotic benefits to your gut biome. Now, as we approach the end of September here in Wisconsin, we're getting dangerously close to frost season. So I went out and harvested the last bit of jalapeños that look decent, and I'm gonna make some fermented jalapeno paste that then I can turn into some salsa and or sauce. I'm going to start by chopping off all of these stem ends to my jalapenos. And if I see any blemishes as well, like this right here, that's coming off. And then I'm going to weigh my peppers so that I can determine how much salt I need. Hit tear. I'm hoping this is right about a pound. Okay, that's fine. A little over 1.5 pounds. We'll make this work. Based on the recipes in the cookbook Fiery Ferments, which I will link to down in the description, it seems that the ratio of salt to chili peppers that you use should be about 1 teaspoon per pound. So we've got 1.5 pounds. We're going to use 1.5 teaspoons. Our jalapenos are going into a large food processor. And I'm going to start with a few pulses. Otherwise what happens is you've got the mash down at the bottom, and then you wind up having a handful of chilies that just sort of swim along the surface. So I want to get these busted up a little bit before I go full on, full power. So that was about a dozen pulses, and you can see it's done a pretty good job busting this up. That is very strong smelling. I'm going to use a spatula to work some of that back down in. And then I'm going to hit this at full power for probably 30 to 60 seconds. I would say that took probably 30 seconds or less. Scrape down the sides one more time. And then I'm going to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You can go kosher, you can go sea salt. I realize there's going to be a very, very slight weight difference between the two of them, just due to how coarse they are. It's not going to make a big enough difference for this recipe. So we want 1.5. After I run this for just a handful of more seconds, it is going to start forming its own brining liquid, pretty much instantly. All right, pop this off. And now I'm going to transfer this to a quart jar. The beauty of lacto-fermentation is all you need is a clean jar. You don't have to go through any sterilization or sanitization. Sanitization, yes, that is a word. Thought maybe I was making that up for a second. I also have a large mouth funnel here just because I do not trust my aim at all. And as I said, this would start forming its own liquid. Can you see it there already? And into our jar. Wow, that worked out well. So I had 1 pound and 9 ounces, so just a smidge over 1.5 pounds, and pretty good fill right there. Now you may be able to see that there's some little air bubbles in there. I could probably get rid of those by banging this on the countertop a bit, but what I tend to do when I'm doing something like this, a ferment or anything pickled, is I'll just get in with some chopsticks and sort of jab at it a little bit. It's a little bit quieter than banging it on the countertop. So I'm just sort of going around the edge here, hitting all those air bubbles. Now, it is going to start forming some of its own air bubbles over the next 2 weeks as part of the fermentation process, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. As part of the fermentation process, you want to make sure that whatever you're fermenting stays under liquid. There are a couple of solutions for that. This is one made by Ball. It's a spring with sort of a little mesh down at the bottom. Now this might work if I were dealing with something larger, pickles perhaps, kimchi, but this simply is not going to work on mash. And it has this little vapor lock sort of lid to let the CO2 out. For submerging, I prefer these glass weights right here. You can see it's got a nice little grip on it. It looks pretty. I think these are the way to go. And I will include links for all of these down in the description below. But we'll put that onto our mash, press it down a little bit. You can see the liquid all getting in there. Everything is nice and submerged. And then for the fermentation lock, I really like these lids for a couple of reasons. One, they're low profile. I don't need to put a fermentation lock, like one of those big bubbly things that you see if people are doing homebrew. I don't need to put one of those on there. It comes right out this hole that kind of burps itself. Plus, it's got this little dial here so you can set the date that you started the ferment, so you can see when it's been 2 weeks. These also come with a little vacuum pump. You do not need this during the initial fermentation because you're going to have the CO2 that's being created by the fermentation pushing the air out. But later on, say you get down to half a jar, you don't want a bunch of air in that jar, so you can either move your ferment to a smaller jar as you're using it up, or you keep using those lids and you use this to suck the air out. But for right now, I'm just going to pop on this lid. Oh, the other really nice thing about it, it's got these ridges. It makes it so much easier when you're trying to remove the cap. And we'll set this to today's date. And then this is going down into a corner of my basement for the next 2 weeks. You do want to make sure though that you put it on some sort of a aluminum pan or plate or something, because as it ferments, it's going to bubble. And as it bubbles, you're going to get some liquid that comes out of that airlock. Trust me on this, you want a plate, a bowl, or some sort of a tray underneath your ferment. Now fortunately, I was planning ahead, so a little over 2 weeks ago, I made a batch of this fermented jalapeno mash, and I'm going to test it right now. Now you can see I've got that glass weight in there, and because I don't know how spicy this is going to be, I am going to wear some gloves just to be safe. I can tell you that the blast of jalapeno smell that I just got when I opened this was wonderful. Oh boy, does it smell so good. Boy, and I probably should have done 2 gloves here. All right, there we go. And because also I wasn't thinking and put the glove on my right hand, I'm gonna have to do this taste test left-handed. Just grab a little bit there. Now, if you've ever had fermented hot sauce, it does have a tiny little bit of funk to it. That's the only word that I can think of. Just something, I don't know how to describe it. But I'm going to taste this and describe what I taste here. That has a fair amount of kick to it. And I probably don't think I would eat this straight up. But I think mixed in with some sour cream, it would be a great dip. I also think you could melt this into some cheese and make a really wonderful nacho cheese sauce. And in fact, I will link right up here and probably in the end card to my super ooey gooey cheese recipe mixture, which, like I said, put a little of this in, bam, nacho cheese sauce. So now I'm going to divide this quart into a pint jar that I'm going to keep for future use, and I'm going to take the other pint and use that to make sort of a shaker bottle Tabasco sauce. I've got another clean pint jar right here, and I'm just going to scoop this stuff out, trying not to spill much. And I think that's going to be good right there. I'm going to pop back on my glass weight. Press that down. Oh boy, we came awfully close to the top. I don't know if you can see just how close we are there. And then I'm going to put back on this fermentation lid. And then this is going to go off to the fridge where I keep my other ferments. I have a little fridge downstairs where I keep all of this stuff just because the smell on some of these things, especially like kimchi or fermented daikon, can be quite powerful and it'll go right through a cap, trust me. So I like to keep that stuff isolated from other food. To make my fermented hot sauce, I'm going to take the other half of that jalapeno mash. We're putting this into I think this is a 1.5 quart saucepan. And to that, I'm going to add 2 cups of distilled white vinegar. And then I will bring this to a boil, stirring occasionally. So this has been simmering for 10 minutes. Now I'm going to let it cool for probably another 5 or 10 minutes before I blend it, just because I do not want any spatter or explosions. At this point, how we proceed is kind of determined by the consistency we like to have in our sauce. And I really want to shoot for sort of that jalapeno Tabasco sort of consistency. And as you can see, right now, it is not that. Now I could just blend this, which I will be doing in a moment, but I do want to thicken it up a little bit. I don't want to turn it into ketchup or anything like that, but I want to sort of minimize the amount of weeping or separation or syneresis that occurs in the bottle. So I'm going to add a little bit of xanthan gum. I'm using perfected xanthan gum. I like the perfected xanthan gum because you can use it like in a pan sauce or something. It doesn't require the full shear of a blender. Its tendency to clump is far less than just regular xanthan gum. So I'm going to take 1/8 teaspoon and just sprinkle this along the top. So I'm going to pour this into my blender. Oop, little spatter there. And I'll start this up and see how it thickens. Determine then if I need to add any more xanthan gum. And I'm going to say that's pretty close to where I want it, right there. Or at least it will be once I run it through a fine mesh sieve. So I've got that same 2-cup measuring cup that I used for my vinegar, a fine mesh sieve, and we'll pour this through. And because my measuring cup is kind of fogged up there, it's still a little bit hot, kind of hard to see it draining, but this will get all the big chunks of pepper out of there and just leave us with what I hope is a nice, smooth shaker bottle sauce. And the straining process can be sped up just by running a spatula along the sides, like such. And once you've gotten it down to basically a paste, you can either discard this or save it for another purpose. I don't know what that other purpose is yet, but I'm probably going to save it. And we'll continue until we've strained it all. Then I'm going to transfer this sauce into these hot sauce bottles. I always save my hot sauce bottles whenever I buy commercial hot sauce. Got a little funnel here because, again, I do not trust my aim. Now, if you want, you can get these dripper inserts to put over the top. I usually save this for hotter sauces, ghost pepper, maybe even habanero. Jalapeno, though, that's kind of low on my scale of heat. And the yield on that came out to 3 bottles exactly. And now these will go down into that same fridge that I keep my fermentation stuff in. Now, because of the vinegar in this and the high acidity, this stuff basically will last forever in a fridge. Or at least it will last longer than it takes you to consume them. I had a big batch a couple of years ago, and I've still got a couple of bottles in the fridge that are good. So don't worry about this stuff expiring on you. Now, this is actually one of the bottles that I made 2 years ago, and the smell on it has mellowed fairly considerably since when I made it. When I first made it, it really had that strong Tabasco aroma to it. Now it almost smells a little bit malty. Fermentation is a wild thing. You get some crazy interesting flavors in addition to all the probiotics. What would I compare that to? It reminds me almost a little bit of an enchilada sauce. It's very complex, not as complex as a mole, but it's way beyond Tabasco. I could definitely see putting this on some wings. Boy, this is so good. I'm tempted to drink it straight out of the bottle, but I'm not gonna. Now, I'll admit, fermentation isn't for everybody. Some people may get a little bit squeamish about the whole nature of it. It's almost like you're letting food decay on purpose. But it is safe, and it's good for you, and it tastes great. It's also one of those things that can be as little or as much effort as you want to put into it. Despite the length of this video, the overall amount of effort was relatively easy over the course of 2 weeks. It's sort of a mix a few things together, put it in a jar, set it, forget it, and then figure out what you want to do with it once it's done fermenting. So if you enjoyed this video, please tap that like button, then hit the subscribe button and the bell to turn on all notifications. If you really enjoyed it, click the thanks button and buy me a cup of coffee. And I got a couple other videos over here you can check out if you're not sick of me quite yet. Thanks for watching.